The big concert hall was filled with activity, even though the main performance wouldn't start for a few hours. Musicians hurried in and out, tuning their instruments, shuffling papers, and talking quietly to each other. The conductor, a tall man with sharp features and a stern voice, paced across the stage, checking everything meticulously. At the same time, the janitor quietly went about his work, pushing his mop and sweeping the floor with careful, practiced movements. He had worked in the hall for many years, and he knew every corner, every crack in the floor, and every spot that needed extra attention. No one really noticed him much. To most people, he was invisible, just a background part of the hall. But he had a secret. He had trained in music from a young age. He could play the piano like a professional, read complex sheet music, and compose beautiful melodies. Yet life had not been easy, and he had to take the job as a custodian to make ends meet. He didn't talk about his musical talent. It was a quiet passion, one that only he knew about. As he moved around the stage, carefully polishing the floor, a few musicians glanced at him. One of them nudged a colleague and whispered something. The words carried across the room, though just loud enough to be heard by anyone nearby. "Look at him," the musician said, smirking. "He's just a custodian. Why is he even here?" Another musician laughed. "Yeah, he probably can't even tell a sharp from a flat. He's just cleaning up after us." The janitor continued his work without responding. He had heard these kinds of remarks before over the years. People had always underestimated him because of the uniform he wore and the broom in his hand. He had grown used to it, though it still stung a little. But inside, he felt a quiet strength. He knew who he really was, and he had learned long ago that the opinion of others could not change that. The conductor, who was reviewing the orchestra's arrangements, heard the laughter and the words. He paused and looked toward the janitor, raising an eyebrow. A faint chuckle escaped him. "Well, he's just a custodian after all," he said aloud to no one in particular, shaking his head. What could he possibly do here? The janitor's hands moved skillfully over the mop, but his mind wandered. He imagined sitting at the grand piano at the center of the stage, his fingers gliding over the keys, producing melodies that could make people stop and listen, that could make their hearts feel something deep. But for now, he remained hidden in plain sight, silently moving across the stage, unnoticed except for the occasional smirk or laugh. The orchestra continued its rehearsal. Violins, cellos, and flutes filled the hall with sound. The janitor paused occasionally to listen, letting the music wash over him. He had always loved being around musicians, even if he could not join them. There was something magical about the way the notes came together, the way the harmony could tell a story without words. He had learned to read sheet music before he could read books properly. Music had been his escape, his companion, his secret world. As he swept near the piano at the side of the stage, a young violinist looked over and sneered. "Hey, maybe he wants to play," she said mockingly, loud enough for a few others to hear. "You think you can handle this, custodian?" A few others laughed, and the conductor shook his head with an amused smile. "Let him do his work," he said, as if dismissing the idea that the janitor could do anything more than cleaning. Everyone assumed he would never touch an instrument. Everyone assumed he was nothing more than a man with a mop and broom. The janitor, however, did not let their words affect him outwardly. He continued sweeping, careful to make the floor spotless. Inside, he felt a quiet fire burning. He had practiced for years in silence, honing his craft when no one was watching. Life had pushed him into the shadows, but he knew that one day, the music inside him would have a chance to speak. He just had to wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, the rehearsal carried on. The musicians were focused, but there was a small undercurrent of amusement in the room. They liked to joke about the janitor. It was harmless fun to them, a small way to break the tension before the big performance. They did not realize that they were talking about someone who could, if given the chance, change the entire atmosphere of the hall with a single melody. The janitor moved quietly, almost invisible, around the stage. He polished the floor, wiped dust from the piano bench, and arranged chairs neatly. He was precise, almost meditative in his movements. Every sweep of the mop, every adjustment he made, was done with care. It was a quiet discipline, much like his music practice had always been. After a while, a small group of musicians gathered near the piano, still chuckling and exchanging comments. "I wonder if he even knows what notes are," one said. "Probably not. He probably just hums while cleaning." The janitor glanced briefly at them, but did not reply. He had learned long ago that proving himself to others was not his goal. His music was for himself, for the beauty of it, for the moments when he could feel truly alive. Their laughter bounced off the walls, but it could not touch the world he had built inside himself. Time passed. The rehearsal wound down. Musicians began packing up their instruments, chatting about the evening performance, unaware of the quiet determination in the janitor's heart. He continued his work, cleaning every corner meticulously. No one realized that beneath the surface of the quiet, unassuming man in the janitor's uniform was a mind full of music, ready to emerge when the moment was right. As the janitor pushed his mop down the final stretch of the stage, he paused near the grand piano. He placed his hand lightly on the keys, just feeling their smooth surface. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to sit there fully, to let the music flow through him and fill the hall. The thought brought a faint smile to his lips. He knew that one day, the world would hear the music that had lived inside him for so long. And when that day came, no one would laugh or mock him again. For now, though, he continued his work, quietly, diligently, as the musicians left the stage and the hall grew quieter. The janitor's story was just beginning, but the first spark had already started to glow. In the shadows, the music waited, ready to emerge, ready to astonish, ready to prove that a custodian could carry a secret brilliance no one expected. The janitor returned to the hall the next day, carrying his cleaning supplies as usual. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, creating a warm glow on the polished floor. The orchestra was not rehearsing yet, and the hall was quiet except for the sound of his mop swishing across the tiles. He moved with a calm focus, almost like a dancer, each step measured and precise. To anyone watching, it seemed like ordinary work, but in his mind, the janitor was already composing melodies. Notes flowed in his imagination as naturally as the rhythm of his mop across the floor. At home, the janitor had a small, cozy room filled with books and old sheet music. A second-hand piano rested in one corner. Though it was not perfect and had a few keys that stuck, it had been his companion for many years. Here, he would practice in secret, letting his fingers move across the keys with passion and precision. Music was his escape, his solace, and his greatest joy. No one in the world knew about this part of him. To the outside world, he was just a custodian, someone who cleaned floors and emptied trash bins. But inside, he carried a world of melodies that could touch hearts. He remembered the laughter from the previous day, the musicians who mocked him, the conductor's dismissive words. Normally, such things would make a person bitter or angry, but not him. He understood that people saw what they wanted to see. They judged by appearances, by uniforms, by the task someone performed. He had learned long ago that true talent could not be measured by how others treated you. It had to be discovered, nurtured, and shared when the right time came. That afternoon, the janitor found himself near the piano in the hall. He stood quietly, letting his fingers hover above the keys. The instruments in the hall were being tuned, the smell of polish and wood filling the air. He could hear snippets of conversation from the musicians in the distance, all casual and unaware of the storm of music within him. He closed his eyes for a moment and imagined the notes flowing from the piano, soft at first, then rising in intensity. Each chord he imagined had emotion, a story, a life of its own. He had spent countless hours perfecting these pieces in his mind and at his small piano at home. In the back of the hall, a few musicians noticed him. "Do you think he even knows how to play?" one whispered, smirking. Another nodded, laughing softly. "He probably thinks he's Beethoven, but he's just mopping floors." The janitor did not respond. He had long since learned that words from others could not touch him. He focused instead on the music in his heart. His mind wandered through melodies he had composed over the years, pieces that told stories of longing, hope, and triumph. He remembered learning his first song as a child, the thrill of pressing keys and producing something beautiful from nothing. That memory fueled him, reminded him of why he kept practicing despite life's challenges. Later, the conductor entered the hall, walking briskly toward the stage. He glanced at the janitor, a slight smirk on his face. "Keep up the good work," he said, almost sarcastically. "You never know when you might need to sweep a few extra notes into the music." The janitor smiled faintly, not with humor, but with quiet understanding. He knew that the conductor's words were not meant to encourage, yet he took them as a reminder that the world often underestimated people. He bent slightly to adjust a chair, then allowed his gaze to drift toward the piano again. He imagined himself sitting there, playing a piece so moving that even the conductor would be speechless. The idea was thrilling, almost dangerous in its intensity. Yet he kept it secret. No one was ready to see it yet, and he had learned patience was a crucial part of talent. As the day went on, the janitor continued his tasks. He emptied trash bins, wiped the windows, and polished the wooden benches. Each movement was done with care, almost meditative. While he worked, he imagined rhythms in his head. Each sweep of the mop, each push of the broom, had a cadence, a beat. In his mind, the hall was no longer a place of cleaning and chores. It was a concert hall filled with an audience, with every seat taken, every eye on him, every ear waiting to hear the music that only he could produce. The musicians came and went throughout the day, practicing sections of their pieces, sometimes laughing among themselves, sometimes concentrating deeply. They still saw him as just a custodian, someone separate from their world. But he observed them, noticed their techniques, their mistakes, their strengths. He studied music through their playing as much as he had through his own training. Every rehearsal, every note, added to the reservoir of knowledge and inspiration he carried silently. By the afternoon, the hall was quieter again. The janitor moved toward the piano, standing beside it as if drawn by some invisible force. He ran his fingers lightly across the keys, feeling the texture and weight of each one. The notes whispered to him, teasing him with possibilities, with melodies yet to be played. He closed his eyes, imagining the piano filling the hall with sound, imagining the awe in the eyes of those who had mocked him. But he did not rush. Patience was part of his craft. Timing, emotion, and precision were all essential for a performance that would truly be unforgettable. He thought about the years he had spent in silence, practicing alone, composing pieces no one had ever heard. He remembered the small victories, the moments when a chord flowed perfectly, when a melody came together exactly as he imagined. Those moments were precious, even without an audience. But deep inside, he knew that one day, the music would find its way out. One day, he would play in front of others and they would understand the depth of what he carried inside. As the sun began to set, the janitor finished his work for the day. The hall was clean, polished, and ready for the next rehearsal. He pushed his mop to the side and paused near the piano. He looked at it, imagining the moment when he would finally sit down and play openly, without hiding. The idea made his heart race with anticipation. He could almost hear the first note, pure and clear, cutting through the quiet hall. He smiled to himself, feeling a sense of hope he had not felt in a long time. The janitor left the hall quietly, carrying his supplies. Outside, the evening air was cool, and he breathed it in, feeling refreshed and determined. He walked home slowly, thinking about the music he would practice that night. He opened the door to his small room, sat at his old piano, and let his fingers dance across the keys. Each note was deliberate, full of life, full of emotion. He played pieces he had created, letting the music tell the stories he had kept inside for so long. Hours passed, and the janitor played, without pause. He lost track of time, lost himself in the melodies. Every chord was perfect, every rhythm precise. The music became a part of him, and he became a part of it. In that moment, he was not just a custodian. He was an artist, a composer, a performer. The outside world, with its judgments and laughter, did not exist. Only the music mattered, Only the expression mattered. Only the feeling mattered. As the night grew deep, he finally rested his hands and leaned back on the bench. His heart was full, his spirit lifted. He knew that the day would come when the world would hear him, when the music he had nurtured in secret would finally shine. And when that day came, no one would dare say, "You're just a custodian." For now, he smiled quietly to himself, knowing that patience, practice, and faith in his talent were his greatest allies. The janitor's journey was just beginning, and the music inside him was waiting, ready to astonish the world. The next morning, the concert hall was alive with movement. Musicians carried their instruments inside, carefully placing them in the correct spots. The conductor paced across the stage, checking the arrangements, waving his hands occasionally, and giving small directions. The janitor entered quietly, his cleaning supplies in hand, as usual. He moved through the hall like a shadow, unnoticed by most, yet fully aware of everything around him. He could hear the faint hum of a violin being tuned, the soft pluck of strings from a harp in the corner, and the occasional thump from a drum being tested. Each sound was like a thread weaving into the music that lived inside him. He started his work, sweeping the floor and polishing the wooden benches. Yet his mind wandered to the piano in the center of the stage. It was a magnificent instrument, one that had been played by some of the best musicians in the world. The thought of touching it sent a thrill through him, and he had to remind himself to stay focused on his tasks. He could imagine the keys under his fingers, the notes flowing out in a melody that would stop everyone in their tracks. The excitement was hard to contain, but he kept it hidden as always. While cleaning near the stage, he noticed a few musicians looking at him again. They whispered among themselves, clearly amused. "Do you think he knows anything about music?" one asked, smirking. Another replied, "He's just a custodian. That piano is probably a mystery to him." The janitor ignored them. He had long learned that other people's judgments were not important. What mattered was his own skill, his own dedication, and his own belief in his talent. He moved closer to the piano, placing a cloth over the keys to dust them. As he worked, his fingers brushed lightly over the keys, and a faint hum of melody formed in his mind. It was a piece he had been working on at home, a composition that told a story of hope and resilience. The conductor noticed him standing near the piano and raised an eyebrow. "Still dreaming about music, are we?" he asked with a laugh. "You'll never play like that, you know. That's for professionals, not custodians." The janitor smiled faintly, a quiet confidence in his eyes. He did not argue, nor did he show any sign of frustration. Inside, however, a determination burned stronger than ever. One day he would prove them wrong. One day he would show the world the music he had nurtured in secret. Later, as the orchestra prepared for rehearsal, the janitor continued cleaning, moving carefully among the musicians. He observed them closely, noting how each player positioned their fingers, how they managed the rhythm and timing, and how the conductor guided them. He absorbed everything silently, using it as fuel for his own growth. Every glance, every note, every gesture became a lesson in technique and expression, deepening his understanding of music beyond what he had learned alone at his small piano at home. During a short break, a young violinist approached him. "Do you even know how to play?" she asked, her tone curious but tinged with amusement. "Everyone says you're just here to clean." The janitor bent slightly, looking at her with calm eyes. "Music is a part of me," he said quietly. "I've been practicing for many years. Someday you might hear it." The violinist raised her eyebrows in surprise. She had expected a shrug or a simple no. Instead, she saw sincerity and quiet confidence. Without another word, she walked away, a small sense of respect forming where once there was only doubt. The janitor returned to his work, but his mind was alive with melodies. He imagined the moment when he would finally sit at the piano and let the music flow freely. He could see the conductor frozen, the musicians staring in astonishment, and the audience completely captivated. The thought was exhilarating, yet he knew he had to be patient. Talent was not about rushing forward. It was about waiting for the right moment, preparing until everything aligned perfectly. As the rehearsal resumed, The janitor noticed that a piece had a few notes missing from the sheet music left on the piano. On impulse, he walked over and quietly pointed out the error to the conductor. The conductor looked at him, startled. "Oh, I hadn't noticed that," he said, clearly impressed by the attention to detail. "Thank you for pointing it out." For a brief moment, the janitor felt a flicker of recognition. It was not much, but it was a start. He continued cleaning, but the conductor's glance lingered longer than usual. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to this custodian than anyone had imagined. After the rehearsal ended, the hall emptied slowly. The janitor moved methodically, making sure every corner was clean. He paused near the piano, letting his hands hover over the keys. He closed his eyes and allowed his imagination to take over. In his mind, he played the piece he had composed, each note resonating with emotion. He imagined the echo of the piano filling the hall, reaching every corner, touching every listener. The power of the music felt almost real, and a small smile formed on his lips. That evening, he returned home and sat at his old piano. He played for hours, letting the music pour out of him. He practiced the same piece over and over, refining every chord, perfecting every rhythm. The melodies told stories of struggles overcome, of quiet strength, and of hope that could not be crushed. Each time he played, he felt more alive, more confident, more ready for the day when his music would no longer be a secret. The janitor's life was still quiet and simple. He continued his duties at the hall, greeted the musicians politely, and moved unnoticed through the spaces he cared for. Yet inside, a storm of creativity and passion raged. He had learned to be patient, to work silently, and to prepare for the moment when the world would finally listen. That moment he knew would come soon. The music inside him was too strong, too vibrant, too beautiful to remain hidden forever. Days passed, and the janitor's routine continued. He cleaned, he observed, and he practiced in secret. He imagined the astonishment on the faces of those who had laughed at him. He imagined the conductor's surprise, the musician's disbelief, and the audience's awe. Every detail was vivid in his mind, fueling his determination and focus. He understood that true talent often waited in the shadows, growing quietly until the right time arrived. One afternoon, as he wiped the dust from the piano keys, the janitor heard the conductor talking to a few of the musicians. "We need something new for the performance," the conductor said. "Something unexpected, something that will really touch the audience." The janitor paused, his heart racing. He did not move, did not speak, but the idea in his mind began to take shape. Perhaps this was the moment he had been waiting for. Perhaps the time had come for the music he had nurtured in secret to step into the light. He allowed the thought to sink in, feeling both excitement and nerves. The piano called to him, promising a chance to show the world who he really was. As the hall emptied once more, the janitor continued his work, but his mind was alive with possibilities. He imagined the notes, the chords, the melodies that would flow from his fingers. He saw the astonishment in the conductor's eyes, the quiet respect of the musicians, and the wonder of an audience hearing him for the first time. Each imagined note made his heart beat faster, and he felt a deep sense of readiness. The music inside him was waiting, and soon it would speak for itself. At home that night, he practiced with renewed energy. Each movement of his hands was deliberate, each note carefully shaped. He played with emotion, letting the music express everything he had kept hidden for so long. The melodies were alive, filled with hope, resilience, and the quiet strength of a man who had waited patiently for his moment. The janitor knew that one day soon, his music would no longer be a secret, and when that day arrived, no one would ever underestimate him again. The day had finally arrived. The concert hall was buzzing with excitement as the orchestra prepared for a special rehearsal. The conductor was giving last-minute instructions, checking the musicians, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. The janitor entered quietly, his cleaning supplies in hand as usual, moving through the hall with calm precision. But today, there was a spark in his eyes, a quiet anticipation that had been building for years. He knew that today something different might happen. As he polished the benches and swept the floor, he kept glancing at the grand piano in the center of the stage. Its polished surface gleamed under the bright lights, inviting him, almost daring him, to sit and play. He imagined the moment when his fingers would finally glide over the keys in front of an audience, when the music he had nurtured in secret would fill the hall and touch everyone present. He tried to keep his composure, but the excitement in his heart was impossible to hide completely. The musicians were preparing, some tuning their instruments, others adjusting their sheet music. A few of them noticed the janitor near the piano and whispered to each other. "Do you think he'll ever play?" one asked. "He's just a custodian after all." The conductor, walking past the piano, stopped and looked at him. There was a hint of curiosity in his eyes and perhaps just a flicker of recognition. "You've been around a lot, haven't you?" he asked casually. "You notice things most people wouldn't." The janitor nodded politely. "Yes, I pay attention," he replied softly. "Music is everywhere here." The conductor raised an eyebrow, a small smile forming. "Music is everywhere indeed," he said. He did not know the half of it. As the rehearsal continued, the janitor moved around quietly, doing his usual work. But inside, he was imagining every note he would play. He could hear the harmony in his head, the melody flowing naturally as if it had always belonged to him. Each chord was precise, each transition seamless. He had practiced this moment countless times in his mind and on his old piano at home. Now the stage was set, the audience was invisible but imagined, and the music was ready. During a break, the conductor noticed that one of the pianists had a sudden emergency and could not perform a short piece for the rehearsal. He looked around, slightly panicked, searching for a solution. His eyes landed on the janitor. For a brief moment, he hesitated, then thought, why not? He's been here so long, maybe he knows more than I think. "Would you?" the conductor started, unsure, but the janitor already understood. With a quiet nod, the janitor stepped toward the piano. The musicians watched, confused. Some whispered, skeptical. "He's just a custodian. How could he play?" they murmured. The janitor ignored them, focusing only on the keys before him. He placed his fingers lightly on the piano, feeling the smooth texture, the perfect weight, the potential of every note. His heart raced, not with fear, but with exhilaration. He took a deep breath and began to play. At first, it was soft, almost timid, as if testing the waters. But soon, the notes gained strength, clarity, and emotion. Each melody seemed to rise from the floor itself, filling the hall with a sound so pure and beautiful that everyone froze. The musicians stopped tuning their instruments, the conductor paused mid-step, and even the staff holding clipboards and cleaning supplies went silent. The hall was no longer a place of work. It had become a world of music, alive and vibrant. The janitor's fingers moved with confidence, skill, and grace. He played a piece that he had composed in secret, a melody full of emotion, hope, and resilience. Every note told a story, and every pause carried weight. The music was not just sound. It was a feeling, a message, a revelation. The hall seemed to hold its breath, listening to the unexpected genius of a man who had long been underestimated. The conductor's laughter from before disappeared completely. He watched in astonishment, unable to believe what he was hearing. This was no ordinary playing. The janitor had transformed the piano into a voice, telling stories without words, moving everyone who listened. The musicians who had whispered and mocked him were now frozen, their eyes wide with amazement. Some had tears forming at the corners of their eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty of the performance. As the piece continued, the janitor's hands danced across the keys effortlessly. He had spent years practicing, composing, and perfecting his art, but now it was no longer hidden. The music flowed naturally, with emotion, precision, and power. The hall, usually a place of routine rehearsals and casual laughter, had become a temple of sound. Every note seemed to echo through the walls, wrapping around everyone in the room, leaving them captivated and speechless. The conductor, usually composed and stern, was visibly moved. He leaned forward slightly, unable to stop his gaze from following every movement of the janitor's hands. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that true talent could hide in the most unexpected places. He had laughed before, thinking the janitor was nothing more than a man with a mop and broom. Now he understood that he had been completely wrong. The musicians, too, had been transformed. Their skepticism vanished, replaced with awe and admiration. They had thought this man was just a custodian, someone separate from their world. But now, they saw the truth. This was a masterful musician, one whose skill rivaled their own. The whispers of mockery had been replaced with silent respect, and some even tried to follow the rhythm, though none could match the depth and emotion of the janitor's playing. Time seemed to stand still as the janitor continued to play. The music rose and fell like waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes powerful, always captivating. He had poured years of practice, passion, and secrecy into these melodies, and now, finally, they were alive in the world. The hall was no longer a place of work, of chores and cleaning supplies. It had become a sanctuary, a place where the beauty of human talent shone brighter than anyone could have imagined. As the last notes lingered in the air, there was a pause so profound that it felt like the hall itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the conductor's hands came together in a hesitant clap. One by one, the musicians joined in, the sound growing until it filled the entire space. The applause was thunderous, not just for the skill, but for the revelation that greatness can appear where no one expects it. The janitor remained at the piano, humble, quiet, but inside, a sense of fulfillment and joy filled him. He had waited for this moment for so long, and now it was here. The conductor approached, his face a mixture of astonishment and admiration. I had no idea, he said, shaking his head. You are extraordinary. The janitor simply nodded, a gentle smile on his face. There was no need for words. The music had spoken for him, telling a story of talent, patience, and quiet determination. The performance had not only revealed his skill, but had also changed the perception of everyone present. No longer was he just a custodian. He was a musician, a composer, and an artist whose music could move hearts and inspire souls. The musicians gathered around, offering congratulations, still stunned by what they had witnessed. Even the ones who had laughed and mocked him before looked at him with newfound respect. The janitor had transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary, showing that true talent can never remain hidden forever. The hall, now filled with the echoes of his music and the applause of those who had once doubted him, would never forget this moment. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter in the janitor's life. He had revealed his secret talent, not with arrogance or boastfulness, but with grace, humility, and the undeniable power of music. The world, or at least this small corner of it, had finally seen the depth of his skill and the beauty of his soul. And as he left the stage, his heart was full, knowing that his journey as a musician had truly begun. The hall was buzzing with disbelief and excitement. The janitor sat quietly at the piano, hands resting on his lap, a calm smile on his face as the applause continued to grow. Musicians who had doubted him just moments ago were now staring in awe, unable to speak. The conductor, who had once laughed at the idea of this man playing, could not hide his amazement. He took a few careful steps toward the piano, his eyes wide and fixed on the janitor. Extraordinary, the conductor whispered, almost to himself. He had seen many talented musicians in his career, but the depth, precision, and emotion of this performance surpassed anything he had expected. It was not just skill, it was passion, experience, and the soul of someone who had spent years preparing in silence. The conductor's usual strictness and formality melted away in that moment, replaced by admiration and respect. Around the hall, musicians began to approach cautiously. A violinist, who had once whispered that the janitor could not play, stepped forward, her bow lowered, eyes shining. "That was incredible," she said softly. "I didn't know someone could do that." The janitor gave a small nod, his humility untouched by the sudden recognition. He did not seek praise. He sought only the music. Yet inside, he felt a warmth he had never experienced before. For years, he had played in secret, imagining how the world might respond. Now he was seeing it for himself. The beauty of the music had reached the hearts of others, and their astonishment was real and profound. Some of the older musicians, seasoned professionals who had performed on grand stages around the world, exchanged glances. They were speechless. They had faced challenges, difficult compositions, and high expectations, yet here was a man who had been underestimated, a custodian who had managed to surpass their own experiences. They had to acknowledge that the talent had been hidden in plain sight all along. The conductor finally spoke, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I am truly impressed. Your talent is remarkable. We were blind to it before, and I apologize for underestimating you." The janitor smiled quietly. "Thank you," he said simply. No arrogance, no need for grand words. The music had said everything. As the applause subsided, the hall was filled with murmurs of admiration. Musicians who had once doubted him now sought to learn from him, asking questions about technique, composition, and the story behind the melodies. The janitor answered with grace, explaining his thought process, the inspiration behind each note, and the countless hours of practice that had brought him here. A few of the younger musicians were particularly inspired. They had always felt pressure to be perfect, to follow rigid rules, and to earn recognition. Seeing someone who had struggled in life, yet carried such extraordinary talent gave them hope. They realized that passion, dedication, and patience could lead to greatness, even if the world did not immediately see it. The conductor, still standing near the piano, finally invited the janitor to play again, this time alongside the orchestra. "If you are willing, we would be honored to have you perform with us," he said. The janitor hesitated briefly, not out of fear, but out of respect for the musicians and the moment. Then he nodded. This was what he had been preparing for, the chance to blend his music with others, to create something even greater than he could alone. The orchestra quickly adjusted, listening closely to the janitor as he began the next piece. This time, the music was not just solo, it was a collaboration. The janitor's hands led the melody, while the instruments followed, creating a harmony that filled the hall with life and energy. Every note resonated, every chord matched perfectly, and the musicians found themselves inspired by his precision and feeling. They had been skilled, yes, but this was something different. This was artistry that could not be taught, only lived. As the piece continued, the audience, staff who had been invited, some friends of the musicians, and a few lucky patrons, watched in astonishment. They had come expecting a rehearsal, a practice run for the orchestra. Instead, they witnessed a moment of revelation, a story told entirely through music. The janitor's fingers danced across the keys with confidence and emotion, each note carrying years of preparation and a lifetime of love for music. When the final chord rang through the hall, silence fell for a heartbeat before the applause erupted. It was louder and more heartfelt than anything the janitor had imagined. Some people were on their feet, clapping, cheering, and whistling in amazement. The conductor smiled broadly, a rare and genuine expression of joy on his face. Musicians hugged each other, some wiping tears from their eyes, overwhelmed by the power of the performance. The janitor rose from the piano, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and deep satisfaction. For years, he had hidden his talent, unsure if anyone would ever understand. Now, the world had witnessed his gift. It was a validation, yes, but more than that, it was a shared moment of beauty, a connection between people through the power of music. After the rehearsal ended, the conductor invited him into his office. They sat down together, and the conductor spoke earnestly. "You have changed everything today, not just with your playing, but with your example. You have reminded us that talent can be hidden, that greatness is not always obvious, and that every person has a story waiting to be told." The janitor listened quietly, nodding. He did not need accolades, but the recognition was meaningful. He had spent years in the background, and now he felt seen. It was a moment of respect and understanding that he had longed for, not for fame, but for the acknowledgement of his dedication and passion. Word of the performance quickly spread. Musicians shared the story with friends, staff at the hall talked about it for days, and soon, local newspapers and social media began picking up the story. People were captivated by the tale of the humble janitor who had astonished an orchestra and a conductor with his secret talent. It was inspiring, a reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The janitor continued his work at the hall, but everything had changed. Musicians treated him differently now, not with mockery, but with respect and admiration. He was no longer just the person who cleaned the floors. He was a valued part of the musical community, someone whose skill and dedication had earned genuine recognition. Yet he remained humble, continuing his work quietly, understanding that true greatness comes from passion, not pride. Over the next few days, invitations to perform began arriving. Small concerts, charity events, and even professional ensembles reached out, eager to collaborate with the janitor whose music had captured hearts. He accepted some, declined others, always choosing carefully, making sure that every performance remained true to his vision and his love of music. The conductor remained a close mentor and friend. Together, they worked on compositions, blending the janitor's talent with the orchestra's strength. Each rehearsal was a lesson, a chance to grow, and a reminder that music was a language that connected people beyond words. The janitor thrived in this environment, his confidence growing while his humility stayed intact. As weeks turned into months, the janitor's story became legendary in musical circles. People marveled at the transformation from humble custodian to celebrated musician. Yet through it all, he remained the same person, dedicated to his craft, quiet, observant, and passionate. The applause, the recognition, the invitations, these were not his goal. His goal had always been the music itself, the ability to express what words could not. He often returned to the hall early, before anyone arrived, sitting at the piano and playing alone. These were the moments that mattered most, where he could explore melodies freely, experiment with emotion, and connect with the music in its purest form. The world could wait. The music could not. It was his companion, his teacher, and his joy. The janitor's journey had taught everyone a lesson. Never underestimate someone based on appearances or job titles. Talent, passion, and dedication often hide in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to shine. And when they do, they can transform lives, inspire hope, and remind the world of the extraordinary possibilities that exist in the most ordinary of people. And so, the janitor, once unseen and underestimated, continued to create, to inspire, and to share the gift he had nurtured in secret for so long. The hall that had once echoed with laughter at his expense now resounded with music, respect, and admiration, a fitting tribute to the man whose fingers could turn simple keys into something magical. Months had passed since the janitor had stunned the orchestra and the conductor with his secret talent. The hall that had once echoed with laughter at his expense was now filled with stories of his incredible performance. People spoke of him in awe, admiring how someone so humble could carry such extraordinary skill. Yet, for the janitor, nothing had changed about his love for music. The fame, the applause, and the recognition were all welcome, but they were not the reason he played. Music had always been his companion, his joy, and his way of expressing what words could never capture. The janitor's life had shifted in subtle but profound ways. Musicians no longer whispered or mocked. They approached him with respect and curiosity. Some sought his advice on techniques, others invited him to collaborate on compositions. He remained humble, patient, and focused, knowing that his journey was about more than just recognition. It was about growth, expression, and sharing beauty with the world. Every morning, he arrived at the hall early, before anyone else. The lights were soft, and the hall was quiet, almost reverent. He would walk to the piano, his fingers lightly brushing over the keys, feeling the familiar weight and texture beneath his touch. The music began to flow naturally, each note a story, each chord an emotion. In those early hours, no one watched, No one judged, and the music was pure and unspoiled. It was in these moments that he felt most alive. The conductor had become a mentor and friend. They spent hours together, discussing compositions, rehearsing, and exploring new musical ideas. The conductor often marveled at how someone so unassuming could possess such brilliance. "You have a gift that is rare," he said one afternoon, leaning against the piano. "It's not just talent, it's vision, emotion, and dedication. You've taught all of us that greatness can hide in the most unexpected places." The janitor smiled quietly. "I only play what I feel," he replied softly. "Music has always been my way of expressing what I cannot say otherwise." News of his talent continued to spread. Invitations arrived from concert halls, local orchestras, and even international music festivals. People wanted to hear the janitor, who had been underestimated for so long. Each invitation was carefully considered. He accepted some, wanting to share his music with as many people as possible, but he always ensured that his performances were meaningful, honest, and true to himself. He did not play for fame or approval. He played to connect, to inspire, and to create moments of beauty. At one rehearsal, a young musician approached him hesitantly. "I never thought someone like you could be so talented," he said quietly. "You've changed the way I think about music and people." "Thank you." The janitor nodded, his expression gentle. "Thank you," he replied. "Always remember, talent can be hidden anywhere. Never underestimate anyone based on appearances." Word of his story reached beyond the hall. Local newspapers wrote articles about the janitor, who became a celebrated musician overnight, while social media shared clips of his performances, spreading his talent far and wide. People were inspired by the idea that someone's worth was not determined by their job title or how the world saw them. The janitor became a symbol of perseverance, humility, and the transformative power of passion. Despite the growing attention, he never let it change who he was. He continued his daily routines, cleaning the hall, preparing instruments, and caring for the space as he always had. Yet, each day now held a quiet anticipation. He knew that every time he sat at the piano, he had the power to touch hearts, to make people feel emotions they could not describe, and to remind the world of the beauty that can emerge from unexpected places. The janitor also began mentoring young musicians. Many were hesitant at first, unsure how to approach someone who had once been considered just a custodian. But when they saw him play, their doubts vanished. He taught them not only techniques, but also lessons about patience, dedication, and the importance of practicing with heart and soul. He encouraged them to listen carefully, to observe, and to feel the music deeply. Under his guidance, they grew not only as musicians, but also as individuals, learning the importance of humility and perseverance. One evening, after a particularly moving performance with the orchestra, the conductor approached him again. "You've inspired all of us," he said earnestly. "Your story, your music, it reminds us why we do this. It reminds us to never judge, to never underestimate, and to always honor talent, wherever it may be." The janitor nodded, quietly humbled. "Music is a gift," he said softly. "It is meant to be shared, not hidden. I only hope that it can touch people and make their lives a little brighter." As time went on, the janitor's influence continued to grow. Audiences came not just to hear his music, but to witness a story of transformation and hope. They were inspired by the idea that someone who had been overlooked and underestimated could rise to such heights through dedication and passion. Children, musicians, and everyday people alike found encouragement in his journey. They realized that talent and worth were not always obvious, and that greatness often required patience, courage, and faith in oneself. Despite all the recognition, the janitor remained grounded. He continued to clean, to care for the hall, and to practice in the quiet hours of the morning. For him, these routines were not mundane. They were sacred, the foundation upon which his music thrived. He understood that true artistry required discipline, focus, and humility. He had learned to wait, to prepare, and to let his talent speak at the right time. In private moments, he reflected on his journey. He thought about the laughter, the whispers, and the disbelief he had faced. Those moments were no longer painful. They had shaped him, strengthened him, and prepared him for the stage. He realized that every challenge he had faced had been a lesson, every underestimation a motivation, and every secret practice session a step toward the moment when the world would finally hear him. The hall itself seemed to embrace him now. The polished floors, the grand piano, and the echoing walls became a part of his story, a witness to the transformation of a humble custodian into a celebrated musician. Every time he played, he felt a connection, not just to the music, but to the place, the people, and the journey that had brought him here. It was a reminder that talent, patience, and passion could create miracles in the most ordinary of settings. As the janitor looked around the hall one quiet morning, sitting at the piano with the sunlight streaming through the windows, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The music that had once lived only in his mind and heart was now alive in the world. The applause, the recognition, and the invitations were meaningful, but more than anything, he felt joy in knowing that his gift had touched lives. He had proven that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that a humble heart and persistent spirit could achieve extraordinary things. And so, the janitor continued to play, to inspire, and to share his music. He remained dedicated to his craft, humble in his achievements, and passionate in every note. The world had finally seen him, not just as a custodian, but as a musician, an artist, and a storyteller. His journey was a testament to the power of patience, the beauty of hidden talent, and the endless possibilities that can arise when one follows their passion with courage and dedication. The janitor's story became a legend in its own right, reminding everyone that the simplest of people can hold the deepest of talents. And in every hall he played, every note he pressed, and every melody he created, his life's message was clear. Never underestimate someone, for within them may lie a greatness beyond imagination.